Welcome to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, the podcast where we dive deep into the journey from vision to reality. I'm Kelly Jackson, your guide on this path of self-discovery, transformation, and intentional living. Here, we explore everything from mindset shifts and personal growth to spiritual alignment and entrepreneurship, sharing insights, stories, and actionable wisdom to help you live a life in harmony with your dreams. Every episode will dig into what it means to not only dream big, but to actually consciously create the life you envision. Let's turn your dreams into real life. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. As promised, I have an incredible guest for you today. I am super excited to introduce Shelly Mullenix. She is the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Health and Wellness at LSU. Aside from that, guys, she has a really long and unique career in sports medicine and athletic training, not only with decades at LSU, she's also been in the NFL, and she was the first female athletic trainer in the SEC, which we're going to talk about that later too. Her perspective brings, I think it bridges athletic performance, mental health, and culture, and leadership. And that's why I think she is such a strong guest to have on this show, especially what Dreamed It Then Real Life It is all about. So she is a trailblazer for women in sports. I am a woman. That, of course, lights me up. She is known as a grounding force for student athletes during high pressure transitions. And that's something that we're going to talk about today because that's really important. I think that what she has done with mental health integration, not only at LSU, but just with the student athletes, but with the program, with sports in Louisiana, which, speaking of, I believe she was just named to the Louisiana Athletic Trainers Association Hall of Fame for induction in 2026. Guys, that has to let you know what a big deal she is and how much she is doing really wonderful things at LSU and beyond. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Shelly tell you a little bit about how she leads these holistic health initiatives across the entire athletic department, not only with the student athletes, with the coaches, with the staff as well. And so this is going to be a great conversation. Shelly, it's your turn.
Great. Thank you so much. So yes, I obviously have a lot of things that I do, a lot of things on my plate, a lot of people to work with and collaborate with, which is really my the best part of my job. But I right now oversee all the areas of really health and wellness. I collaborate with one of my partners, Mickey Collins. She's one of the directors of sports medicine. So I work collaboratively with her over athletic training. But other than that, oversee the mental health, the nutrition, the training and leadership. There's just so many units, strength and conditioning, and all those people. And what we really try to do is make sure that all those component parts are equally utilized within developing a student athlete at LSU. So it's not just about what's happening on the courts and the fields. It's not just about what's happening in the classroom, but we really kind of have to look at everyone in a really holistic way. And that's the approach that I use when I work with both the coaches and the student athletes.
Holistic is the key word here.
Yes,
it really is. Before we get into anything else, give a little bit of a definition. What is your take on a holistic approach? What does that mean? You said it a little bit there, but a little bit more of what you believe holistic to mean.
Yeah. Well, let me just reverse by saying also in the last 8 years, I think it's been, I've gotten my master's degree in social work. So I'm a master's social work. I'm an LCSW. I say that first because where I come from with the approach to holistic wellness is that I really look at a human as a whole being. And everyone, says that and they understand that to be true. But at the end of the day, you really have to look at the actions that you do, the way you interact with someone, what you know about them when they come to us, what their history is, in order to be able to address them as a full human being. So they just don't show up here at 18 years old and we assume that they're a, elite, 5-star athlete and we treat them as such. They're children. And so they're children with parents and they're children with parents who just lost their parents. So they've, got a lot of baggage that they bring with them. They bring their whole selves with them. And so if we're going to be working with someone holistically, we really have to know all parts of them. So it's the biological part, the psycho, part, social and spiritual. All four of those components really make up kind of what we are as a human. And we have to make sure we address all those.
100%. That's when one of the things I say my journey has been and how I like this platform that we have. What I talk about is optimal health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Yep. Those are the four things I always include within when I say optimal health. And you're reiterating that here because this really is what it's all about, this holistic approach.
Yeah.
And when you say that, let's just say this too. So you've been at LSU for how long now?
Going on to my 28th season, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many student athletes on average, no, like a year, do you have at LSU? And now I know that number has changed over the decades, but just to give people an idea.
Sure. My perspective, I guess, which is football centric, because I worked football the whole time that I was here. A team, and it does vary by, say, 10 to 15 athletes, but generally speaking, 110 student athletes every year. So,
okay, guys, do the math. So 110 athletes every year. And she's been doing this for 28 years. And listen to everything that she just said about each athlete they treat as a whole person, as a whole human. So this is, imagine how much experience she has. Before we get into this conversation, I really want to put this into perspective so that you all understand that when she is speaking as a woman who has personally interacted with thousands of student athletes. And that means that she has personally heard stories of thousands of student athletes' family dynamics, of their struggles, of their challenges, of their everything.
Yeah.
I'm getting chills talking about it because I really, guys, this is like this position that she's in. And I want to talk a little bit about this later too. We'll get into this at the end, how you handle your mental health when you've been in such a high pressure situation, the position that you're in. But we'll get to that at the end.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point that out. So guys, thousands of student athletes. So what she just said, and I had the honor of meeting Shelly originally, probably about 2 years ago in her office. We got to sit down and have a talk and I got to see her in her element, right there in her space in the athletic department. She's got a really, even your office space, I'll say too, it's so great. It's like very warm and comfortable. So clearly from the get-go, you have created a space where people know that they can come in and let their guard down. So what is, let's just start from there.
Yeah.
When is the first time that you meet a student?
Well, so before they get here for recruiting.
Okay.
So in football, we were part of the recruiting process as well. So we might meet a 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader. And the conversations that I have with those 10th graders and their parents is really similar to the same conversations I have with when they were with us. My approach really doesn't change. It's obviously age appropriate, but someone that's in 10th grade right now knows what's going on. So there's not a whole lot of need to hide, and their parents know what they're usually struggling with. And so my part of the recruiting process was really communicating about the mental health processes, the services that we have, the drug testing program, why we do what we do. And that often comforted the parent because I'm a parent, I've got 2 children. And the worst time is when you send them off to kind of grow because you just don't know. You're sending them off to a place you can't control anymore. And so I think it was really neat for me to meet the parents because when I hear the stories about the parents or about the grandparents, I really know them. And then before the portal and NIL and all that stuff, when the athletes would be with us for legit 4 years, there are a lot of opportunities in the process of those 4 years where I reach back out to the parents, or the parents would call me because they know something happened with their child. They would want us to know so that we can give them extra support. So that family dynamic that we talk about is super important. And that's really where the holistic approach comes from. Because in the absence of the parents, it would just be me trying to figure out what's going on with them. And if you've got an 18-year-old, it's sometimes very hard to figure that out. So really utilizing this multidisciplinary approach with everyone who's working and touching these student athletes on board, all having them work together to support the student athlete is really what is most important. So I may not get all the information, but maybe someone in the academic center did. And then the relationship that I have with the folks in the academic center is super important, because they can then give me a heads up that this athlete lost his uncle, his girlfriend, whatever the case may be, which then allows me, while I'm doing my athletic training skills and taping, to say, hey, how was today? And I've got a way to work into the conversation eventually where we're going to go, so that I know I can get the student athlete to feel comfortable enough to have that conversation with me about what was bothering them. And that's what we did every day. That's what athletic trainers do every day. Shout out for athletic trainers. This is really what we do. We're there for them in kind of the good times, the bad times. And we're there when they get injured. So we're there to really nurse them back to health. And that's really where my love for the mental health piece came in, because what I realized pretty early on was we were just supporting mental health care. I think the worry I had was there was so much counseling that could go on that I needed to really get the credential to be able to do that in the best way and in the safest way possible.
So it sounds like some of this happened organically for you in your career, that when you first got into it, and what was that, 2006? When did you first start? You were a trainer.
Yeah. So I started here in 1997.
Oh, 97. Okay.
97 is when I started, having come from Florida State. So at Florida State, I was also a staff athletic trainer there too. But arrived here in 1997 for my first season being under Coach DiNardo in 97 of August. So yeah.
And then as you saw the needs of the players and you had more experience, one-on-one, hands-on experience, and you started realizing, okay, there's a need here, and see a need, fill a need. And so you did some continuing education. You brought yourself to a place where you felt like you could support the needs of the team the best. And in the process of doing that, you were promoted along the way, and you got all these different degrees. And now I want to talk a little bit about some of these initiatives that you have, brought to LSU and beyond, and what that looks like, because I know all of that came from you. You've gotten probably close to $1 million in grants and whatnot to bring some of this stuff and to do research. So what has that been like? And I know it's been inspired by the students themselves, the student athletes.
Yeah, I do think about why I ended up where I ended up is really, I think of two athletes in particular that really drive my why. Although I would say even before I arrived at LSU, helping student athletes maneuver injuries and maneuver just life as a young adolescent or middle adolescent, I guess, was always super important to me. But the bulk of really what propelled me in the direction that I landed was a suicide that we had with one of our student athletes. And this was someone that I was working with very closely, specifically with this individual through his rehab. I should have known more, when I think about what I could have done different with this individual. I should have known more. And I always felt that I had fallen short in providing him what he needed in order to be able to feel comfortable enough to communicate to me. And I remember really specifically when I got the word that what had happened, we kind of got it collectively while we were in the training room. I thought that he had been murdered, because there was no other way this kid would have died. Like, it didn't even dawn on me that it could have been a suicide. And I remember, now that I know, of course, the phases of grief, what I was doing, but it took me a while to really believe that he did that. And then had to really work through that myself and what I could have done differently. And I know now, like I really try to teach others, we're not in control the way we think we are in control of those types of things. But it's always been in the back of my mind, and it's really the cornerstone of why I do the work I do. I like the crisis work that kind of comes from the environment, because it's so high speed and fast paced, and lots of moving parts, lots of different individuals, lots of different lives that you're kind of juggling. But though, it was that moment really, and one that has happened after that first one, that really have solidified the importance of the work I do, because I do know that the time that we collectively have spent with these two individuals that I'm thinking really did save them for a period of time. And I think that that's important too, which, sounds very counterproductive, but I really do believe like every day that you can keep someone alive is a day that they can learn more about themselves. And that's really why we're here, right? If it ends poorly, it ends poorly. And there's, lots of sadness and regret. But I do know, at least for the second student athlete that died by suicide with me, it was after he left. And I know how much growth he had in the time he had with us. And then after he left, that he was a wholer human being when he died and when he chose to die. And that for someone who works in this space, that means something. Yeah.
I agree with you on that. There's two things that came up while I was listening to you share that story, and I appreciate you sharing that story and being vulnerable in that way, because that is one of the things that we'll talk about later, because your position that you hold, you do feel that heavily when everyone does, you in a different way, especially at someone you're working close. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
And there is two things that came up. So one of them, I do want to talk a little bit more about the suicide. There's something that you are doing over the PMAC with Matt Burrow, the Joe
Burrow Foundation.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yep.
And that has to do with this. And I also have two people who I love very dearly, who chose to exit the world in that fashion. And this is very dear to my heart too. And so I feel you on that. And so this is something I want to talk about. The other thing, when you were talking about that, well, this is going back a little bit, but the families, I want to say two things and I'll let you talk. When you said you meet the families, and I'm sure because of that, and not even just when you meet them, but sometimes with our mental health, that comes from, we may be coming from an environment where there's a lot of dysfunction and things like that. And so when they come to college, that might be the first time that they're actually getting out of that environment that was really not helpful for their mental health. And so this is kind of like you're getting them at a fresh start in a way, kind of place. Maybe not. I mean, there's still this, but the environment may be different.
The opportunity is there.
The opportunity is there. So I want you to speak a little bit on what you know to be true about how our environment does affect us and how the people we choose to surround ourselves with. It's not always who we choose. Sometimes it's our family growing up. We don't have a choice. Yeah. But then as we do get older, college and beyond, and you're working with these students, the roommates we choose to have, the people we choose to surround ourselves, right? Like all that stuff that impacts and influences our mental health. So a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. And then another thing that came up while you were speaking about your own journey, actually, that will come back to me. Let me let you speak on that if you're good with that.
Yeah. So I think, again, when you say these things, the faces pop in my head. So I've got a particular guy I'm thinking about who was a little bit of a struggle for us in football. Not very difficult to coach, I would say, but the coaches struggled with him a lot. He really wanted to do things his way. He also seemed to be hyper focused on his pain. Things that shouldn't have really hurt just hurt, and it hurt longer than it should have hurt. And we always had a hard time getting him better. Then you'd put him back out there and he'd make a play and you're like, okay, I thought you were hurting, which really is a struggle for coaches to understand. But I took the time to understand a little bit more about him and where it's coming from. And I wasn't really putting two and two together at the time, but in the course of my conversation with him, I understand he basically raised himself, very dysfunctional home, dysfunctional in that if he got home, the stuff that was going on in the home was not good. He'd just lock himself in his room. So he is a very independent person, doesn't need to talk to a lot of people. Well, that wasn't great for team camaraderie, but that's really was his survival skill. His survival skill was locking himself up in the room, doing his homework. He's a good student. But that created secondary problems when you came to a culture like we have at LSU and a team where you needed to be part of the greater good, right? When you're the big fish in the sea in the high school, he had that job done. Like he was the best guy out there. But when you bring him to this kind of scenario and you expect him to be able to be yelled at and coached, coached hard, eat this, show up here, open your door, don't talk. That's hard when you tell someone to do that who's just not, it's not even a survival skill for to do that. So understanding, again, the history of the person allowed me, with the help of our clinicians. So we did have psychiatrists and psychologists that we used at the time. So I was not doing this alone. But it allowed me to understand through their guidance, through their teaching, what he was probably experiencing. And then I can then turn around to the coach at the time and say, this is what I think is going on. So in the absence of someone doing that, instead, the coach just keeps on yelling at the kid. The kid withdraws more and more. He gets unhappy. And then we end up in a place where he's more depressed, and then that kind of cycles itself in a direction that we don't want to go. So really that intervention part early on was important. I didn't have to ask those questions. No one has to ask these questions. But if you don't get, invested in the student, invested in the human, and ask those questions that have nothing to do with football or nothing to do with baseball or whatever the sport may be, you're never going to know what's underneath the skin. And that's what you need to know in order to get them to be their best. They're not going to be their best if you don't know what makes them tick. And it could be good or it could be bad. You still have to know. I want to know when you're smoking weed, what does it make you feel? And, that's not a question you typically ask someone who's 18 or 19 because they're not used to talking about that. They don't want it to, they've never talked about that. But I have to understand that from a mental health standpoint, to understand what it is that you're feeling, because I can probably come up with some other ways that you can better manage that emotion or that feeling. Let's try this. And, it takes months and, and years to kind of perfect that. But in the role that I have, it's really nice because I see them when they're just young and immature. And then to now, the truth is that some of these guys are 47 and 48 years old. They're not that much younger than me. I was super young when I started, but they still call, right? Because we know that we still have these same problems. We maybe, morph in a different direction, but it's super important for me, again, for the parents to know that there are people here that are going to be with them for the long haul. And that's really, if God put me here on earth for something, that's what it was. Like, I don't know where it will end up, but I don't like to leave people alone or hanging. I've done the 988 call. Like, that was a highlight of my social work internship, was to be on the call for these people who were struggling in the moment. That there's nothing better than helping people that way when they feel like there's just nothing left.
You're a good person to be on the other end of the line. I know,
it's a challenge. It's hard. It's hard to hear the stories. It's hard to hear the stories when you have your own history of that. Right. But I know, again, thinking back of why I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm doing it for these two guys, right? Like that happened for a reason in my life so that I can be doing this work. And that just is what drives us. That's what drives anyone, is their experiences and their traumas. And I wasn't going to let it bury me. I was going to be more powerful because of that. And I think about that all the time when I interact. Their faces will never die for me because they are the reason why we move forward.
Okay. And so I recalled the thing I was going to ask about, and then we'll move it to this other thing. And that was the substance abuse, because this is something that it's a real deal. People, sure. We want to distract, we want to numb, we want to run away, we want to do all the things. And substance is a way to do that. And that could be anything from alcohol to something like you said, smoking weed, to stuff that's way harder than that. Yeah. So and I'm sure, I would imagine over the decades that has evolved too. And so what has that been like for you on your end as a trainer and dealing with the substances, whether that's performance things or also just things to not feel what you're feeling,
Yeah. Nothing's really changed except for the potency of the weed, right? Like we've always had pain, in my setting, surgical pain. And so there's always been a Lortab. Maybe there wasn't early on, maybe there wasn't Oxycontin, but at the end of the day, while Oxycontin seems to be more addictive, Lortab is just as addictive. It helps you do lots of things that you wouldn't do if you didn't have it on board, especially if you're in pain. So nothing's really changed at the end of the day, but the potency and the risks that come along with that stuff are what's really changed. and then the exposure to the kids at a younger age, right? We weren't necessarily doing the stuff that these kids now have access to. And so, that's a problem. But I think also the normalization of specifically marijuana has become a problem, because just because it's normalized, there's been nothing that's changed in terms of its dangers and its risks. Of course, I come from this lens, right? I'm a healthcare person. But we know through science that there's a higher risk for schizophrenia if you're using marijuana long term. We know that there's a higher risk for cardiac events at much younger ages for those people, and strokes at much younger ages for people who are using marijuana, who are using a lot of the energy drinks. These are all real things. I mean, I know people that have suffered heart attacks early in their age, way before they should have. And I also know what they were doing. Now, whether they wanted to put it together or not, who knows? I mean, when you're ready to put it together, you'll put it together. Kids at 18 or 19 are not ready to put that together, because right now they just do want to be numb. They don't want to feel it. And so, unfortunately, drugs and alcohol are just a way that people do that. And it's successful in the short term. It's just that it's not successful, and it can't be in the long term. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you have things in place for when people come and there's substance abuse, and what if they're contemplating taking their own life? Like, these are some of the things that people that are real things, that are ways that I would say probably two of the main ways that mental health can manifest itself in a negative way would be, you would turn to something to escape. And look, addiction can look like sex. It can look like gambling. It doesn't just look like substance.
100%.
There's lots of different ways that addiction can manifest.
Yes.
But I would say addiction and then hopelessness are the two big ways that depression can manifest, or mental health can manifest itself in a way that could potentially take you out of this world.
Sure.
And so, you, I'm sure, have things you could add on to that, but if we could lead into this conversation.
Yeah. So I think hopelessness for sure, but I always think of isolation.
Oh yeah.
Isolation. I mean, there's nothing worse than feeling like you are alone in the planet. Which is why I talk so openly about my own stuff, because everyone's got it. Everyone's just not brave enough to talk about it. And just the conversations with these guys and girls about what some of my experiences have been, or maybe if I'm sharing the experience that I've got from another athlete, they're like, really? Because they think they're the only person on the planet that's dealing with this, and they're not. And so it's so important to normalize all those things and to have those open conversations, and really, again, getting to the stuff I've been able to do beyond the athletic training room in this new role as administrator. So working with the Rain Will Bring Flowers Foundation is something that I've started doing. I guess we're in our third year this year. The Planting Seeds of Hope event at PMAC is the signature event for that.
Yeah.
And it's really about being together with people and not being isolated. It's also about teaching, whether it's parents or grandparents or brothers or sisters or teachers, how to ask that question. That's the stuff we talk about. And we do that through the lens of a student athlete, a former student athlete, or an NFL athlete, who they perceive as being perfect, right? Like there's no way this guy's got problems. They all have problems. And so every once in a while we'll get an athlete who's willing to talk about that, because they too recognize that sharing themselves is saving others. It makes for just a tremendous platform that you could bring your family to. There is no age appropriateness for this topic anymore.
Agreed.
It's super interesting story. I'll leave out names, but we have a former player that came to this event the first year, and he had his youngest son, who was, I think, 5 or 6 at the time. And he asked me, he's like, what do you think? I'm like, bring him. Like, what's the worst case scenario? You'll have to explain what this is. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, in a couple of years, he's going to see it on his social media anyway. So it'd rather come from us than from the social media platform. He brings his son in. His son, I watched him when we were doing the presentation. His son was listening. He's a super smart little kid. So this former athlete comes back to me a couple weeks later. He said, "You're not even going to believe this." I said, "Yes, tell me it." Well, the kid goes to school the next day, And his friend that he sees all the time in the classroom was crying. He asked the friend what's wrong. The friend basically discloses to him, who was a year older than him, discloses to him that his mom had just been diagnosed with basically a terminal illness. And he was sad. And so this kindergartner pats him on the back, says it's okay. Have you talked to anyone else about this? And he said, no, just my mommy and my daddy. And he said, well, we need to go talk to somebody. Walks him to the school counselor. So we find the story about afterwards because the counselor calls the former player, right? So he says, this is the kid's dad. Look, when you come to pick up your son, I want you to come see me. I have something to tell you. So the guy goes to pick up his son and the counselor tells him what his son did. He's 5. He's 5. So I'm real tired of people saying, it makes me uncomfortable that I don't know how to say something. When a 5-year-old can say something, we all can say something. And we may not say the right thing. And it doesn't matter because in the absence of what you say, they're isolated. They're by themselves. And so again, thinking about my time with 988 is keeping them alive for that night is our goal. Like our goal that night is to get them to the morning time. The morning time's another day and it's another fight, but they've survived the night and there's success in that. And so just knowing that this 5-year-old can do this to a 6-year-old and that 6-year-old, what that individual just did was basically change the trajectory of this 6-year-old by letting him know it's okay to be vulnerable. The 5-year-old knows that he was really successful in helping this kid, makes him feel good about it. And now the kid's probably 8, 9 years old and it's just as smart as ever, has had a good experience with mental health and really will grow from that. And we got to start it earlier. We can't wait till I get them when they're 18 for me to pull them into the training room and say, well, you look sad today. What happened today?
I love that story. You know, it's beautiful. And you're right. If a 5-year-old can do it, we can do it. And one thing you said, what if I say the wrong thing? I want to mention this. Everything that we say and to anyone we say it to is going to be perceived through the lens of whatever they're going through anyway. So what you say, you could say the same exact thing to 5 different people and they're all going to interpret it and perceive it a little differently. So you kind of have to, there's this little saying about before you say something, let it run through 3 gates. Like, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it honest? You know, like if it's those things, you know, be discerning in what you say, but don't overthink how it's going to land because you cannot, if you're doing it from a really a good place, you know what I'm saying? That's what you do. You can't assume or guess or know how it's going to land. You just can't.
No. And you can say,
but don't let that be a reason to not try.
That's right. Because you could say, look, I don't even know how to say this to you, but I'm so concerned about you right now. I just want to check in to make sure you're okay. And I don't know if that's the right thing. I don't want you to run away from me. Like, just say it. Because in the absence of saying it, no one has said anything. They don't have to believe you. But I can tell you, I've heard it over and over again. We heard it today in talking to a student athlete. I think he said I saved his life, which I think is crazy because I was just there. I didn't save his life. I found out he was home. He wasn't at practice. I thought that kid does not need to be by himself. I leave work. I go to his home. He doesn't want to speak to anyone. I said, let me in. I push my way through and then we talk. He's a 35-year-old guy with a very successful career and a business, and he survived. And that was him. It really didn't have much to do with me, except that I let him know that it was okay to feel whatever he was feeling in the moment. I guarantee you I didn't say the right stuff, but I showed up for him.
And you know what else you didn't do? You didn't, or he knew someone saw him.
Yeah.
He didn't feel isolated. We're getting back to that word.
Right.
You didn't allow him to sit in isolation because when we sit in isolation is when we can tend to spiral. If you don't have the tools to regulate, and I know you can back me on this, the nervous system is a big player in everything we're talking about here. And if you don't have the tools to regulate, when you're isolated and you're buying into this narrative that I'm all alone, nobody understands me, nobody knows what I'm going through. And the more you continue to repeat this narrative that nobody understands, the more you isolate yourself. And that's when that hopelessness grows and you feel like what's the point?
Yeah.
And so speaking of that, I don't know that everyone listening would know this. So 988 that Shelly has mentioned a couple times is a hotline that you can call. Can you tell them a little bit more about 988? Because everybody might not know about that resource.
Yeah. So there's songs about this resource,
Okay.
but we've made it easy by making it just 988 now. So on your phone, you just call. And I think one thing I've noticed too is that it's not just the suicide hotline, it's a crisis line. Yeah. So you don't have to be suicidal to make a phone call on these lines. You have to just be struggling. And even, you know what, call even when you're not struggling. So what I'll challenge people to do is if you can't say, I mean, if you haven't called yourself to know what it's going to be like, how do you tell someone to call 988? Right? So call yourself. And I've done this a few times with someone with me, right, who was a little bit more reluctant to call. So I call, I said, hi, my name is Shelly. I happen to be, an athletic trainer and I'm a social worker, but I'm with someone who doesn't know what this is about. Can you tell me what it's about? Because at the end of the day, it's a warm body on the other side who's not going to judge you, who's got some skills to basically just check in and to make recommendations. They're not going to arrest you. They're not going to send the cops. They're not going to do those things. They are there to be able to listen to you, because at the end of the day, it's not true that no one understands. It's just not true. And like you said, it's your body and your brain saying that to yourself. And I can talk myself into doing anything, right? I mean, that's the beauty of the brain. But when it's not functioning right, knowing that you have an access to a crisis line like that with people that are trained to manage the emotions, to separate you from whatever source you are thinking about, whether it's your pills or a gun or a knife, whatever, there's skills that they help you walk through that get you to survive to the next day. And that's the key is, get to the next day. The next day will be different. It may not be better. It'll be different. And if you can, if you can survive, I've said this 1,000 times, if I haven't said it 2,000 times to student athletes, if I can get you to survive to graduation, I feel like I've done a really good job, because it's just crazy. It's hard to be a kid. It's hard to be an adult. The longer you live, the more skills you acquire. And you also can look back in hindsight and say, that was really bad, but I survived that. I can do it again. If you want to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And do it better. Okay. Yeah. Speaking of, so we talked about these challenges. Oh, there's the mic. I was in the totally wrong place. Okay. Just what you just said. One of the things that made me think of, and I want to get into that, is there are some new challenges now that didn't exist when you started your career. And that's the NILs and the revenue share. Yeah. And what is this doing? Because this is a whole nother factor for mental health. Because now, not only do we have the opportunity, which is great, but this also presents a new kind of pressure from family, that self-imposed pressure from all kinds of things. And I know that this was not something that y'all had protocol in place for, because you didn't know it was going to be a thing. So this is something you're kind of like building the plane while it's flying. Yeah. And what has that looked like for y'all over there? And where do you see it going? And just, if you want to open up about that.
Yeah. So we actually just had a conversation a couple hours ago in a meeting about what we don't know yet. I mean, what we can do is anticipate that this is going to be a problem, because we know it adds a layer of stress. It adds a layer of responsibility to the student athlete, at least a perceived responsibility. So it's important to go back. Again, speaking about football more than anything else, but athletes want the best for themselves. They want the best for their family. They want to be able to take their families out of whatever situation they're in. You don't need to tell them that. They already know that. That's part of mental, makeup of how we work. It's what drives us to do what we want to do. When we now have opened it up where the parents are actually acting as the agents for the deals, for the contracts, you no longer become the parent and you become their agent. And what a kid needs is a parent. And that's a really big challenge, because, if you hire an agent or you hire a consultant or whatever you want to call them, it's money out of the deal, right? Because you're having to give this person a percentage. But I guarantee parents in hindsight would say, man, I would have given up that 2% to stay your mom, to stay your dad for a little bit longer. And so it gets very complicated, I think, because again, the kids now have some kids have a lot of money to give back at a younger age. So these are the same problems that I was dealing with my guys who made it in the NFL, who then had to really figure out what it looked like to be used by family members. It's now these kids. These kids are in fact making more money than some of the athletes that we had that went into the league. I mean, when you go into the league, you don't automatically make $1 billion or $1 million or even $500,000. Some guys end up with very little at the end once taxes are taken out. They end up with very little. So these deals are actually, in a lot of ways, a lot more lucrative. And while you see good stuff, you see athletes giving back to communities, you see them doing things with the money. There's also this other component where they have to give back to home, right? And especially, in a state like Louisiana, where we are, for the most part, a lot of poverty, you want to do that. It just changes the dynamics of who you are as a parent. I can't tell you now, if I'm the child, that I'm struggling, if I know you need me to be able to get yourself out of poverty or to be in a home that's in a safer place. I don't want to put that burden on you, mom. So I'm not going to tell you everything. Well, then you've already isolated your mom, who's your biggest cheerleader in some cases. And then who do you turn to? So if we don't start doing stuff to remove the stigma about mental health, when they come to a place like LSU, they have to know that we've got counselors in place, that we've got people that are not going to judge you, that can care less about anything else except for you. They don't care if you never step on the field. They'd love to see that, but they don't care if you do or not. They're here to really basically help mold you, help you grow, help you kind of not feel so alone when you are in fact alone. I mean, you can feel that way in a place like college, even without athletics. But the NIL opportunities are fabulous. I think it's an incredible opportunity. And if we can line them all up with financial planners who are going to put the money away for them, it's incredible. You can really be set up for a long time. But that's not the reality of what it's like. And the truth is that there's not a lot of money really for most of them on the table. It's certain sports. And I think there's also this feeling of otherness. So if I'm not them, then and I'm just this, people think I'm getting money. I'm really getting nothing. And I don't even have enough food to eat. I don't have money. I don't have money to go buy clothes. Right. So they're great. They can walk around. They could be in LSU gear all the time because we give them so much stuff. But what happens then when the LSU gear is gone? They've got nothing left. So the NIL money is not there for everybody. The rev share money is not there for everybody. The scholarships there are not there for everybody. We have lots of walk-ons. We've got to kind of, again, going back to that wholeness part and wellness part and holistic part is make sure we're just developing kids. Like that's our job. Our job is there to be there for these kids. And if for those of us in the leadership position, if we're not approaching them as their rent-a-parent, then we're doing our job wrong. And it's hard, especially like now with me in administration. I'm not in the training room, so I don't have the rapport I have with the kids that I had before. I've got to figure out a way to bring that part of me to my relationships with these kids, because otherwise I'm just an administrator, and that's the business. And if you're the business person, there's no one that's going to disclose anything to you because you can just cut me. And that's also the difference between a really good coach, right, and a coach who says this is a business, making a business decision. The best coaches are the ones that are going to make those relationships real and really make them about something more than just the wins and losses. And it's easy to say that you do that. You show that in your actions. And it's hard when you also then have to decide as a coach how much this person's worth. So how do you teach an 18-year-old that you actually have a value on you now? You have a stamp on you. Mm-hmm. That's a tough thing for an adult to figure out. The guys I have in the NFL have a hard time seeing that. It must be incredibly damaging to one's self-esteem to be able to understand that's how they're being seen and thought of now as 18-year-olds.
Yeah. Something came to mind. Pardon, when I was listening, and then you just kind of ended with it. What happens? How do you handle it because so many of these student athletes and professional athletes as well, but I would assume that they really have their identity wrapped up in their performance. Mm-hmm. So what happens when they get injured, or they don't get playing time, or they don't get that contract or that NIL or whatever? So what happens, or they do get hurt, but like I said, what do you do? Because again, with some of these kids, I mean, their identity is wrapped, and it could be from their own ambitions, but it could be because of the pressure of growing up like they do. It's like their parents they've heard their whole life, everything I sacrificed for you, you better go, and so what happens if it's like, how do you coach them through that, train them through that, talk them through that?
Yeah, it's amazing. When you ask these people, what do you love about yourself? The pause. They can't even think. They can't even come up with the words because they don't know themselves in any other way other than being an athlete. Like, are you a thoughtful person? What do you like? How do you describe yourself? I'm a good athlete. And then you stop them. You're like, no, like I'm beyond that. Like this is gone. This is gone in a couple of years. What are you beyond that? What's going to happen? Where are you? How do you identify yourself? Are you a loving person? Are you an angry person? And then you just have those conversations and you realize, and they realize that they're more than just the athlete. They've got to see themselves as more than that. But you're right. Their entire identity in most of these sports since the age of probably 5 or 6. I mean, they're playing football that early. They're doing gymnastics that early. They're dancing that early. Those are all things that they have it's been a part of their makeup. So you can pretend you didn't talk about it as a parent, but I know that the things that I did with my own kids, it instilled in them who they are. And so, yeah, don't ever quit. Yeah. What happens if you have to quit? I mean, I've asked that question to athletes.
Or you want to.
I've asked that question too. Yeah. Why wouldn't you? What's stopping you from doing that? But they have to at some point transition to who they're going to be. They're not going to always be this. If the NFL lasts 2 years, which is the average, right? 2 years, 2 or 3 years max. Who are you after? You're literally 27. What are you?
Well, you're a baby.
You're a baby and you're done and you're not a millionaire, right? You haven't made it to your second contract. The money's going to be gone because I know when I have money in my pocket, how quickly it goes. It's going to be gone. Like, what are you? You didn't graduate. Did we graduate? So it's like super important we start talking about those things. Like, while I loved it that you left to go to the league, you got to graduate because now you can't come back and even coach in high school because you don't have a college degree. So asking those questions earlier and challenging them on what their identity is earlier, not just when they're a senior and they're transitioning out. It might be too late at that point. Well, it's never too late, but you'd want to have those conversations in there sooner is important so they can start identifying with who they are beyond that. But yeah, we hear it all the time. I mean, we hear it all the time. Even when you prepare for that transition, it's a transition.
It's a transition. And that is what I want to talk about too. When I introduced you, I talked about one of the things I said about you is that you're a grounding force for students during high pressure transitions. And so that and the portal, let's talk about that because those would kind of be the transitions that I'm thinking of is when some of these athletes have the opportunity to go professional before they finish, like you just mentioned. And there are things that have to be weighed. Some athletes decide, like I know I was at the ceremony for LSU baseball. They were the national champs this year. And I was there for the ceremony they did at Alex Box. And one of the players, right, had the opportunity to leave, but decided to stay. And so those are conversations you have. What does that look like?
Yeah. And they're conversations that they have had with their mental health professionals in addition to their family and their coaches. There's lots of different factors. Like sometimes it doesn't make sense. If I'm making up a number, if I'm going to make $300,000 by staying, and I know that I'm going to be in minor league ball, driving on a bus for the next, 38 weeks or whatever it is, I might want to opt to stay here, right? Or do I value the relationships? I mean, there's one thing that we always hear, and again, this just got brought up in another meeting today. If you were to ask an old player what they miss most, they miss the locker room, they miss the training room, they miss those things because that's where life happens. And so when you have to make the decision, is it best for me to make a business decision and go now? As long as they understand what they're leaving on the table, that's important. And that they don't, regret it. I think everyone's got regret. That's kind of part of making these decisions, but it needs to be just a really thought out decision. And it needs to be done, in my opinion, and with more people than just the family, because the family does have a stake in it. Yeah. And no one has really asked the kid what the kid wants. And the kid usually wants something completely different than what is on the table for them. And they have to be able to say that. And if they want to go, and they go, that's great. And they don't look back. I've got athletes that have never looked back and don't care about graduation. They've gone on, to do what they've done. But in the absence of asking those questions, then you leave stuff on the table. And, what is the harm in spending an extra day and really having a conversation with someone? You just got to find the person that you trust to have that conversation with. That's not going to have a stake in it. I mean, for me, they were talking to me, I'd have them all stay, right? Because I feel like I'm their mom. I want them to graduate. I want them to experience college. I know what it was like to be, working, on contract with Coach Saban in the NFL. I knew what that looked like. It looked very different. So it's just important to be able to have your person, know who that person is, and have those real conversations. And then working through how to say that to the people that love you, that this is not what I want. And that might hurt them, but that it's really your life. It's not your family's life. It will hurt me. Like it does hurt my soul, but it also, there's something beautiful in letting them go and letting them make their own mistakes, letting them grow, letting them come to those decisions on their own. At the end of the day, they're going to do that anyway. So be there to support them. And whether you're doing it in the shoes of a parent or a shoe of a coach or whatever, I just think there's nothing better to be that person that can just have a conversation with someone and not judge them for it. I think that's, I think that everyone needs that.
Everybody needs that. There is, so you've mentioned twice, and I knew this. So you've been here at college for a while, and you did have some experience in the pros. And I wanted to ask a little bit about the athletics, like what you could share about the difference in the terms of like the care and the expectation and the culture from collegiate to pro. And you said some of the things are similar, but there's going to be some differences too. And so not every student athlete obviously goes professional. Right. Not every desires to. They don't all desire to. And they don't, even the ones who maybe want to, don't all necessarily have that opportunity. Right. However, there are a good bit that are. And so not only are you preparing them for what's happening in their life right now, but you're also getting them ready for what's to come, whether that's pro ball or not. So I would imagine the fact that you have spent some time working in pro football, that gives you a unique perspective that you can bring back with you now that you're working with these collegiate athletes to be able to really, because it's different, it's, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would, specifically, again, this is, it's a very small percentage. We're spoiled here in Baton Rouge. Let me say that from a football perspective of how many people we actually have. The percentage is much higher here. So we think it's kind of normal. It's so not normal. I mean, if you can get one person to go pro, you've done it great. So, LSU is just phenomenal in terms of the level of talent it puts out. I would say that they're really not that different. They're just grown up versions of their younger selves. I think in time, again, with their experiences in the NFL or experiences just in the workplace or whatever it may be, they tend to grow. They tend to change, but a lot of people really are who they are. There's just not a lot of change. One thing's super interesting that made me think back when I started talking about, kind of reflecting back in identity. I remember talking to an athlete in the NFL, and this was a guy that I just idolized as a young person growing up. So he was on the tail end of his career and was really struggling with, he had gotten hurt. He was struggling with kind of, what do I do next? I'm like, what's next is that there's a football field out there that you can walk on right now and coach every one of those guys. That's what's next. Like, why are you in here upset? Like, that's your future is in front of you. He didn't even understand the impact that he had in his presence of being on the field. And this is someone who'd been in the league for 10 plus years. And his story did not end good, which is super sad. And I think about his story often. But that just speaks to me to the importance of understanding who you are beyond an athlete, because you could not be this good of an athlete, this iconic figure, and believe that you have nothing beyond your sport when just your presence on the field gives people power, gives people encouragement. Like, he was everything to those people. And he couldn't see past the fact that he couldn't be on the field. He didn't know who he was. So I go backwards a little bit in terms of talking about identity. Because I do think that that's something that we get kind of caught up in, is not knowing who we are, not knowing that there's life beyond sport, and trying to figure out ways to kind of create that earlier in the process so that you're not stuck at retirement, which is retiring at the age of 31, 32, not knowing what's next, like not knowing what you have in front of you. The other thing that comes to mind is an athlete that I was working with his weight. So one of the other things back in the day when we didn't have registered dietitians working with our teams, we were, athletic trainers have a really broad scope of practice and wide skill set. So one of the things that we can help is do some general guidance on food. And I remember talking to this guy because in the league at that point, no one's telling you can't drink or smoke because there's, it's just a different scenario. And they are set in their ways. So if they want a little rum and Coke, they're going to drink a little rum and Coke. And I remember a guy telling me that no one was going to tell him to stop putting down his brown. I'm like, I'm going to tell you shouldn't drink the brown, right? You should not be drinking the rum if we're talking about your weight, because this is what it does to your body, and kind of walk through that. I mean, he really was not hearing me. I was this young female. He's probably thinking, what the heck is this? What is she doing? I went back that following year and he actually looked pretty good. And he came over to me, he goes, I put the brown down. I'm like, yes, you did it. So it's just, again, I don't know how I would have been able to impact this individual, but it's a bit about the way you're delivering the information to him. It's the fact that I had nothing to lose. I didn't care if this guy played. I didn't know his name until I showed up, and saw the roster. Then I'm like, okay, I don't know who he is, but we'll talk to him. It's important for me to also, I think, like, not treat them like they're special. I think everyone's special. Like every human being is special. And so when they can be treated that way, I think it actually makes them feel more heard, because while they like, I think, being taken care of, I think they also want to feel, they also want to be nobody. Like they don't want to always be that star. And so if you're always working with them and you're always treating them in a way that makes them feel they're iconic or they're big, well, that makes their ego feel good. It just creates a larger mask that they really have a hard time taking that mask off when it's all said and done. And so if you can just kind of strip the mask off in the beginning, I'll never ask for a signature from anyone. I don't want anything from you. Rarely ask for anything, because it changes the dynamic and the relationship that you have with them. And if you can just kind of take that mentality and put it with your kid, it's hard. So as a parent, in the world of NIL and the world of rev share and all this stuff, it's really hard to separate yourself from that, because the money is tied up into it. And that the future is bright for them if they can stick with it. At the end of the day, they have to make those decisions on their own, and they've got to have the support and the love, and it's got to be non-judgmental, and just got to be able to be supportive. And I know that doesn't work for every family and every situation. But again, having that person that's there for them is important. I've always been a big proponent of making sure that you've seen the mental health professional. If you haven't seen the mental health professional, you're not reached your capacity yet. You have not reached your peak.
I like that.
Yeah. And I think about that in high school. And I know it's hard to get kids in because you're limited always in whether time, space, money, access. But man, if you could start your kid in third grade and then have them have that rapport with the counselor, whether it's a social worker or psychologist, whatever, when the crap hits the ceiling, when they're, of that age where stuff really starts happening, if that person's been in their back pocket all along and has been along for the ride and hasn't judged them, that's who you go back to. They'll disclose to that person that they have these feelings. It's really hard for a kid to come and say, I'm feeling like I want to hurt myself. But a lot of them are having those feelings. So if you can't be that person for them, you need to set up the scenario where you have someone in place, whether it's a mentor or a coach that's doing it the right way, or a psychologist if you've got the means, a social worker, those types of things. You got to be able to, as a parent, give them the access to the other people that could be the good influences and not the bad ones. And we kind of talked about that in the beginning, because the bad influences are going to always be there. There's always hanger-oners. There's always a crew. And sometimes they have to figure out who those good people are on their own. And they hopefully do figure it out. They figure it out in a way that they can recover, right? Because there are, we all have friends, we all have people that have gone that route and really never recovered. but that was the route that they were going to take. Like there's really not much you can do. You can just instill with them the right things, what your experiences are, and also like be truthful of your own experiences. Like I think I told my kids all about myself. Probably, boundaries is probably an issue for me with my kids, but I think they knew it because I knew they would learn from some of those mistakes that I made. The absence of me saying anything and pretending I'm this perfect parent, I'm not doing them any favors. No. And so, the authenticity part is always important. And I think that when you deal with a mental health professional, they typically will bring that to the table, which is something that parents just have a hard time doing.
Yeah. And I'm glad. And this is why, and LSU is not the only university that has this in place. I'm assuming
Correct.
all of the universities, that major universities do have this program, just like what LSU has, with someone who does a job similar to the job that you do, where you are, because these student athletes are coming to play at your university, in your case at LSU, and they may be away from their families for the first time. Their families may have been supportive. They may have not been supportive. They may have been functional. They may have been dysfunctional. It doesn't matter. Now they're at a place and they're here with you and they're in your care. And y'all have this really comprehensive team of people with all of these different areas of expertise, right? And then collectively you work together, and the relationships, from what I'm listening, the relationships between all of you are really important, between you and the people doing the schoolwork.
Academics.
Academics and all of this stuff. Everybody works together to make sure that these students are being cared for, and that they are that they know and realize and understand there is life beyond the field or the court or whatever. And that, while that is fun and exciting and wonderful and great, it's not the only thing.
100%.
Yeah.
And got to be more than that.
There has to be more than that.
Yeah. I will say that not all schools have the comprehensive integrative approach that we take. Yeah. And I think, and I've told this to parents on recruiting, I heard you're going to be recruited by XYZ, right? I know you're going there next week because I'm in the news. Ask them if they have a program that does this. Like you need to ask how often they drug test. You need to ask how they utilize their mental health people. How many of your athletes actually utilize the mental health professionals? Ask those questions, because the truth is that there's not a lot of people that do it the way we do it, that integrate it that well.
Well, and that's why you've been nominated, or you're named into this association. No, really, because you are doing things that are cutting edge. You are integrating and bringing initiatives to LSU. I mean, that's why you're being recognized. And so you're right. This isn't everywhere. But I think that what you're doing is you are setting the standard for how it needs to be. And ideally, every university, because not every student's going to come to LSU, but every student is, in my opinion, worthy of the same resources. And so you want to ideally see every university follow in suit for what y'all are doing here at LSU.
Yes, they all deserve that.
Yeah, I agree. I want you to share a little bit about, now this is for the girlies, for the women. So something that you would say for women who are seeking a career in a male-dominated field like you did. What is just a message that you have for these females?
Well, without sounding cliche, because I have read a few books, you belong at the table. You belong there. You've got to be confident. You got to carry yourself in a way that that people believe that you know what you're talking about, even when you doubt yourself. There's so many stories I could tell that are just coming to mind. I mean, there's just a lot to it. I think you have to have a real strong sense of morals and ethics in my setting, right? I'm in a locker room, and I can go back to my high school as a high school athletic trainer. Our athletic training room in my high school was literally in a caged and open cage inside the locker room. So what am I, 15-year-old? Guys are getting undressed around in the locker room, and I'm got my head down, I'm taping, right? I could have also been a different type of girl, and I could have taken advantage of the access that I had. But for me, I was there to do a job. So this was not a very hard thing for me to do, to believe that I belonged at the table, because I was not in it for other reasons. So I think that that's a super important piece too, is to understand and really ask yourself why you're here. and this is probably too graphic for the podcast maybe, but like when I think of,
you haven't heard all the episodes of the podcast. It's not too graphic.
Okay. Like I don't want to date my gynecologist, right? Like I want my gynecologist to be my gynecologist. I don't want to see them at a bar. I don't want to, and so that's how I kind of approach it. Like I want these people to see me as I'm a medical professional. I'm an allied healthcare professional. And if I can establish that level of respect, then there's nothing that they're going to say that's going to throw me off. They can make passes at me. They can say all kinds of stuff to me. I got to be quick enough on my feet to say something back to let them know that's not going to fly with me. And I think that that's not an easy thing probably for a lot of women, because we're not trained to be that way. We're trained to be kind of subservient and to, just kind of let things happen. In this type of field, you really can't do that because you'll just get eaten up and spit out. But you got to be smarter than everyone. You got to be better than everyone. You've got to be confident, and you got to believe that you belong.
You belong. I definitely know that. I haven't even done a little. Okay, we're great on that. So there is. I don't know about y'all, but I'm really enjoying this conversation with Shelly because she has so much to say and she's had so many experiences. So there is this whole idea, and you were talking a little bit about starting with a third grader, having someone, this, what you were just saying, and that they can confide in and everything. And one thing that I started, you're a mom, you have twin daughters. Yep. I have 2 daughters as well. And yours have gone through college already. They went to LSU, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Mine are in high school.
Okay.
They just turned 14 and 16. And one thing I started with them when they were around 3 and 5, though, was this program called Generation Mindful that I had discovered. And it was all about emotional intelligence. And best thing I could have ever done. This is not how I was raised. This is not how I started off raising my children. But right at that age is when I left, when their dad and I separated. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I had to redo everything. My life. It was not, mental health is something, if you guys did not tune into last week's episode, I did a huge, really big, like Shelly mentioned, the way that we help others is by sharing our stories. So knowing that Shelly was going to be here today, I opened up about my own mental health journey. And that is what last week's episode is all about. And I'm vulnerable and I put it all out there. Mm-hmm. And so before my girls, when they were 3 and 5, when I left that marriage and when I realized I did not want to repeat the pattern and something had to change. And so I started my intentional journey. And when the teacher is ready or the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And this Generation Mindful was something that I learned about. And this lady, Suzanne, that invented it's amazing. Mm-hmm. And it's all about emotional intelligence. And I started it with them at that young age. And I'm going to tell you now, here, they just turned 14 and 16, and they've, experienced some pretty big things by this point, right? Yeah. Like as teens, they've gone through some things that have really challenged them, that have really been hard with friendships and relationships and family dynamics, just all kinds of things. And 100%, the way that they're able to navigate through this, because for the last 10 years of their life, emotional intelligence has been like a priority in our house. It's night and day. I can't even imagine what it would be like communicating with them, living with them, raising them, parenting them, if I had not been integrating emotional intelligence all the way along. And so if you want to share your insight on that, I don't need to talk about it. You're the professional here. I've just had the lived experience to know. And I know, though, that my girls, when you talked about, because, one of them, she only got 1 more year and then she's off to college and the other one is a freshman now. But like you said, when you send them off and when you let them go, you got to trust that they can spread their wings and fly. And I know that giving them that really strong tool set, that emotional intelligence, is going to serve them so well, because it already has.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's never too late.
No, it's never too late, for sure. I mean, I think they're going to hear you differently if you're just now going to show up and start saying those things, if you haven't lived that experience. So the sooner you can do it, the better, which is why, there's age appropriateness to what you say to a kid, but there's never a time, like, again, having the student athlete be at the Rainbow Bring Flowers, event, Planting Seeds of Hope event, and hearing it, I said, you go for it. Because what's the worst thing? You're gonna have a conversation about that. He's gonna say, why would someone kill themselves? Son, it's complicated, son. I mean, sometimes people get lost in their emotions, and you can have a beautiful conversation with a kid that no other parent's having with their kid because he brought him to that talk. So, but it does take some skill on the parent side, and it takes a lot of it takes effort and energy to search out those experiences and those classes and finding the right people to be able to teach it. But it'll pay back in dividends. I mean, there's no doubt. They're still going to make mistakes. Yours are 14 and 16. Let me tell you, sweetheart, it's still coming.
We haven't even started driving yet, so I know
yeah.
it's still coming.
It's still coming, but they'll be more prepared, and they'll have more to lean on because of those experiences that you gave them. So absolutely, the earliest you could have a therapist to let them know that that's normal. Having a coach, having someone that's a confidant. Maybe it's your aunt. It could just be your aunt, and you don't understand the value of having that aunt that was there for you or that uncle that was there for you. Gosh, who are they going to ask these questions to? Like I love the talks when we'll have like these sex ed talks or we'll have drug ed talks. I tell them I'm coming to the table not as an administrator. I want to talk about all the stuff. I'm not going to go back to your coach and tell you asked this question or you asked that question. This is the only place you're going to be able to ask that question right now. You can go on Google and TikTok and do it there. But you don't know what you're getting. I'm just telling you, I can give you the facts. You got to find those people that can deliver that to your kid. And so whether it's in programming that does emotional intelligence, that's fabulous. If the teams that they're working on are only focusing on the wins and losses in your little, soccer game, you're missing the boat. You're missing the boat. And the earlier you can teach your kids to also incorporate the mental health, or the coach to incorporate mental health conversations in those moments, is going to be then the expectation that they're going to take when they go to college and they play, or when they go to college and they are engaged in a group conversation with their peers, or when they become, an employee in a place. It starts then. And you have to have those conversations. So if you're stuck in a program that is just about wins and losses, you're in the wrong place. We all want to win. I know that the more mentally strong we are, the more you bring to the table, right? There's no doubt we are not making you soft. Like if I hear that one more time, we are not making you soft. I mean, if we followed Coach Saban's theories that he's, spouted all these years, he was up mental health before it was cool. Like before we talked about it, it was really because of him that I've ended up where I have. That's what you need to talk about, because unloading the crap, unloading all the extra, which is still a part of who you are as a whole, but being able to know that it's not identifying, it's not defining you, and that in this moment you can bring this part of you to the table, but you have to come back to this. I mean, that's what it's all about. You cannot just turn it all off. It's impossible to turn it off. You can turn it off in a moment, but if you're not talking about it and settling the score with your mental health, you're never going to really get to where you need to be.
Guys, moral of the story, mental health is not a taboo topic here.
No.
And for anyone who is still living in that old, outdated paradigm that this is hush hush and that you don't talk about this, guys, wake up, because this is what we're talking about now. It's out in the open, and it's important, and everybody matters. And if you feel like your mental health is suffering, you have to know that you are worthy of living a life where your mental health is thriving. We all are.
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is just like you can improve your physical health, you can improve your mental health. And like all of the things she said with finding the right people you can trust, I would say that is the first and foremost thing. Find somebody that you can trust. It can be a friend. It can be just somebody, maybe somebody that you don't even know. But if you're feeling alone, or if you're feeling isolated or hopeless,
just tell somebody. Yeah, tell somebody. And it doesn't have to be, these things that you don't think as a parent are a big deal are just enormous, right? And kids are so impulsive nowadays. And you've got to be able to separate that emotion from the response that they're going to give you, because it's going to be startling. But but the only way that you know that they're going through those things is by having those conversations with them. And you have to ask that question. If you don't ask the question, or are you feeling like you want to harm yourself, you're not going to get the true answer. And until you can feel comfortable enough to really ask that question, you're not doing everything that you can do as a parent. And it's a hard question. I've asked it of both my kids. It's a difficult question. It's a scary thing, and it's scary to get the answer, but it breaks down walls. And in the absence of asking those questions, they're thinking about it. They not everyone has suicidal ideations, but there are a lot of people thinking about that. They live in a different world than what we lived in. They're doing, these shooting practice things. Like, it used to be a fire drill. Like, what's the chance of a fire breaking out in your school? But they know the reality of what's happening in their school. They're constantly in fight or flight. You've got to be able to make sure that they're not living in that all the time, because that's what really causes a lot of the impulses. And when they're alone with those impulses is really where you get into a dangerous position. And so you just have to be there. You have to be there as a friend, as a human being, and hope also to surround yourself, I think, as a parent, surrounding yourself with other parents that maybe they're the built-in aunt, right? Like, maybe you can think about the one friend you had that was just the cool mom. Like, that's the person they're going to talk to. And that's okay if they don't talk to you. They got to talk to somebody. And as long as you have this agreement where, yeah, if you hear something that really is something I need to know about, you'll let me know. Will you let me know? Yeah, I'll let you know. Okay, then you have this agreement where you're really working in tandem. It does take a village. It takes an absolute village to be able to do this thing called parenthood. It takes a village to be able to raise human beings. It's always been that way. It's not a new thing. But we all have become absorbed in our worlds, in our phones, and answering our emails and staying on the phone and doing these things that we're forgetting that we're a unit. And you don't have to even be a real family to be a unit. You just have to find what that unit is and be committed to yourselves.
Yes. Let's talk about you, because this is everything you just said. Your mental health, we talked about this. You have this position, it's high stress, and you're dealing with all these things and everything you just said. And sometimes we talked about being a parent, and these student athletes have their parents. And sometimes, though, there are people in our lives, maybe it's our children or people close to us, who their mental health maybe is not as stable, but guess what? Ours isn't either. And so, holding space for someone when we are struggling ourselves is another thing. So maybe, and that's why I feel like it's important, if you recognize that your parents are emotionally unavailable for you and you need that, that's why you got to seek out someone that is. It's not always, like you said, our parents not always in a position to be that one for us.
Right.
And ideally, yeah, that's great, but that's not always the case. So that doesn't mean you're broken just because you didn't have the mom or the dad that could come through and be that strong rock and checking in on you. That doesn't mean you're not worthy. That doesn't mean nobody cares about you. Your parents just have their own things that they're working through.
Yeah.
And so I just want people to hear that too, because sometimes if we have an emotionally unavailable parent, that can make us feel like we're not worthy because that parent's not checking in on us or doing the things that you just said.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you're not worthy. That just means your parent's struggling and they have their own mental health that they're dealing with.
I'm making myself maybe sound like I was this great parent. I guarantee you, I was not available for my children. I worked 18 hours a day. I work first. I do not know work-life balance. And my kids, I brought them along for the ride as often as they would come. But yeah, clearly work was something that was the forefront of everything that I did. And we all have paid the price for that. But it's important to be there. Sometimes it's important to also tell them, like, I'm sorry for the times that I wasn't there. I mean, I've said that to my kids. I think they know that I have failed many times. Doesn't mean that I'm not the best mom that I could be. I just am what I am. They got me. This is what you got. And I'm not going to fill your cup every time. You've got to have something else. And that's the trouble, is I think when people don't realize they're not getting their cup filled by their parent, and they also are isolated because they don't have friends, right? Then what do they have left if they don't have a parent and they don't have a friend? And it's a struggle. And sometimes they just have themselves, and themselves have to be enough. And so that's the problem, is if you're an athlete and then you don't have that anymore, you really have nothing, right? So really identifying early who you are, what you want to do, what makes you special, and really like understanding you only have yourself. You really only have yourself, right? Check in on other people, be there for other people, because it could be lonely in those spaces too. And just because someone looks like they've got it all together and they're doing it does not mean that they are. Yeah. I mean, they might be numbing it. They might be, like you said, drinking and using pills or smoking.
Or my old addiction before my celibacy journey was sex. I mean, we have different, we numb out in different ways.
Absolutely.
I hope you have forgiven yourself for the times you weren't available for your kids. I know I had to forgive myself for the times, when I left the marriage and started that journey with them. I said, what I committed to was raising my kids without raising my voice, because the dynamics of the relationship prior to me leaving, it was just, that wasn't the case. And I knew that I deserved more, that they deserved more, that I wanted more. And that was like something I committed to. But I also have had to forgive myself and not beat myself up for who I was at that point. That's like you said, it's who I was. It was where I was. It was the season I was in. And it provided a polarity. Now I know I've been a parent in both ways. I've been the high stress, high strung parent that was like taking it out on the kids, Mom, what? Like because my nervous system was so dysregulated that it was just the slightest little thing. I was overworked. I was burnt out. I was sleep deprived, all of the things that we do. And it was manifesting itself as not being the best mom that I could be for my kids. And so does that mean that I'm perfect now? Of course not. But I definitely have come a long way, and with self-awareness, with personal development, with time, maturity, all those things, like you and I both. But I'm saying this for Shelly, for myself, and for anyone listening. You can't hold on to this. You can't hate yourself or beat yourself up for how you were in the past, right? In any capacity, because that is going to affect your mental health as well. You got to free yourself of that and really just give yourself the grace and forgive yourself like you would forgive someone else, because at this point, part of mental health and emotional health and all of this spiritual health is being able to love yourself unconditionally, even through the seasons of your life when you didn't show up as the highest version of yourself. You were doing the best you could with the tools that you had at that time.
That's right.
That's what we're doing. So let's talk. Before we head out, you want to tell them a little bit more about this thing at the PMAC? Is there a date for that?
Yes. February 24th, I believe. Okay.
So it's an annual thing. So every February is something that, and can anyone go to this?
Anyone can come to this. So we encourage, the basis of it is it's kind of focused on student athletes, just because we know that the athletes' mentality, that's what draws the people in. But this is veterans. These are people that are first responders, anyone who's managing difficult situations and they have kids and they don't know how to have those conversations. You come with your kid and we'll have the conversation for you. We're basically just going to expose you to the things that are going to allow you to have an easier conversation. I can't tell you the number of phone calls we had afterwards, after these events the last 2 years. It said, that was the first time my kid opened up to me, was in the drive home from that event. And that's what we want. Like and again, you may not say the right thing on the ride home, right? But if you sat in the audience long enough, you'll know what you should probably say. But the idea that your kid would open up to you just because you sat through this experience of listening to someone else's story of how they felt is just a really unique situation, a neat opportunity to be a part of. It draws, a couple thousand people each year. We have free food. We recognize that, feeding your kids is important. We want to make sure we've got everything there. There's resources there for anyone who needs support. There was over 36 vendors that we had last year. So that, it's just it's a happy event. It's a motivating event for people. It will actually be an event that I think that will drive the young people into the professions of health and wellness, which I think is super important because that's where we need to be. I mean, that's a major profession. There's always going to be a need for that. Most of the people that go into that field have some experience of their own and their own struggles. And so what better place to really be at a place to be with a bunch of people who can be authentic, be real, and be vulnerable all at the same time about a topic that's really difficult to talk about.
That's what I liked. You said it's a fun event. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's a fun event that covers a really heavy topic or heavy topics. And so I like that y'all are bringing that and making it approachable because, you know, we all know I talk about shadow work, but that's the whole thing is that with the Mise Ombre is my art, but I want it to be approachable because we have to quit making it like the big scary monster under the bed that nobody wants to talk about, that everybody wants to hide.
Right.
You know, no, this is life. This is all part of the human experience.
Absolutely.
So y'all plan, like, look it up. It's, I'm sure on the LSU's website. I'll put the links in the bio, the show notes.
Yeah, we can give you that. We've got to save the date at this point.
Perfect.
But it's usually going to be towards, again, the end of February. I think it's on a Tuesday. I think we're playing Tennessee maybe a couple days after women's basketball. That might give you the guide of what week we're in. But it'll be great. And it'll be, we're on the news usually leading up to the event. We'll have lots of social media stuff out there for it. But it's a great event. It really is such a special place. And you don't have to be, you just have to show up. You don't have to have any agenda. You just want to bring your kid. Again, the ages, generally speaking, I think 10 is kind of the sweet spot probably when they really start thinking about that. We have kids that are dying by suicide at 9 and 10 years old. So there's just not an early enough time to have the conversation. And again, it's about hope. It's not about despair. It's really giving them a place to know that people are there and present and really want to hear them talk.
Yeah. And that their life is valuable to this world.
For sure.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful for you for coming in and for being here and sharing what you've shared today. I know it was funny when I first talked to Shelly about doing this. I said, I want to sit down and, hear everything you have to know. And then I laughed at myself. I'm like, as if I could hear everything you had to know in 1 hour. But I think this was a good launch pad. This was a good way for people who don't know you to be introduced to you, and for people who maybe do know you to learn a little bit more about you and to find out what y'all are doing over there at LSU that makes y'all so special and that really does make the whole athletic department at LSU, in my opinion, top notch.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure in your opinion too.
Yes.
And congratulations for your induction into 2026.
Thank you.
That's really exciting.
Yes. Thanks.
Anything else you want to say?
No, just been an honor and always nice to be able to just have real conversations. That's what I do best.
For sure. All right, guys. I love you and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It. I hope today's episode sparked something powerful within you. Remember, every step you take towards your vision counts, no matter how small. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please take a second to hit that subscribe button or leave a review. That would be amazing. Or share the podcast with someone who's ready to bring their dreams into reality too. And if you're looking to dive deeper, connect with me on social media at Dreamed It, Then Real Lifed It, or at BE_what you want. Or visit dreameditthenreallifedit.us for more resources on aligning your life, business, and dreams. Until next time, keep dreaming and keep manifesting your dreams into real life. Love you, friends.